Hi everybody, welcome back to the IG 2020 Quilt Fest sort of class highlight. So I was talking about some of my favorite classes to teach for Instagram Quilt Fest. And one of my favorites, just because they're so cute, is the little pincushion, buddy pincushion set. So this is a great beginning sewing project or even beginning to intermediate. What we practice a lot with this project is a lot of applique. This was a project that I got from just a sewing magazine. And what it basically comes with is it comes with your basic template that you trace. So each piece of the little owl has its own piece that you trace. And then you're going to transfer that paper to your fabric and cut around it. What I do for this project is I use a little trick. I actually use a stabilizer that is a water adhesive. So you get it a little wet and then it will stick to your fabric. It makes it a lot easier to cut around. So let me show you how you'd kind of trace and moisten and cut. So we're going to go ahead and get our piece of stabilizer. You can see from here, I'm not sure, but it does have a shiny side and a dull side. The shiny side is going to be your adhesive side, so you want to put that down. And you can see it's nice and see-through. This is a Baby Lock water adhesive stabilizer. We carry this all the time in the store. It's a really good stabilizer. We're going to take our pen out and we're going to trace the lines. Just make sure you're holding that piece down the whole time so you don't accidentally run off and trace wider than you should. And if you get a good press on there, you'll be able to see that line really well through this stabilizer. All right, and then when you're creating all your pieces, I like to label it with the label that's underneath. Just C is enough for me, so we're kind of upside down, but you'll see. Just write a little C there. And then you have your traced owl piece. So now what we're going to do is grab our fabric that we're going to use for that piece, which we're going to use this little piece of brown scrap. And we're going to go ahead and first spray with, you can spray with water, you can spray with anything that's kind of wet. I like to use Best Press because I eventually iron my project and it gives it a nice crisp feel. So we're going to use some Best Press to just spray on the shiny side, the opposite side that we traced of our stabilizer. And I like to just kind of rub that around a bit and let it air out for just a minute so it gets nice and tacky. If it's too wet, it'll end up just sliding around all over your fabric and you don't want that. So once you've got it nice and tacky, we're going to go back to our fabric. Whoops. And you're going to lay him down. Alright, and it gets just enough adhesive on there, just enough stick to keep those pieces together. So now when we go with our scissors, you're not worrying about pinning or trying to hold the pieces together. It's already stuck together for you. We're going to go in with our scissors and go all around the edging. And now we've got our piece that matches our pattern. So now that we're done, we can peel this paper off. And we've got our little owl head. So just move that out of the way. Just a heads up, I like to keep that map and keep all my pieces on my map, because these teeny tiny pieces love to run off without you knowing, and then you forget to cut them out and put them on your owl. So that's just a little tip from me in doing this project. It helped. And then we're going to go over to our mostly completed owl. Put his little face on there. And then get his eyes on again. And isn't he just too cute? So as you can see, this is a great project to use all of your tiny little scraps. If you want to take a look at my pile here, this is the kind of fabric that I was using to put this project together. You do not need a lot of fabric. It's stuff that you already have hanging around, so that is super cool. I always love when I can do that. And so we have our owl front of our cut pieces that have been put together, and our owl back. So now is the tricky part of getting all of our applique around our edges. So applique is referred to as the stitch that goes around a raw edge to keep the two pieces of fabric together. We call that work applique, when you're putting a top fabric to a bottom fabric by sewing it on. So we're going to take this over to the machine, and we're going to talk about some of the easier applique stitches to use and some applique techniques, and then get our owl together. Alrighty, so we were working on our owl project as part of the IG Quilt Fest 2020 prompt today. One of my favorite classes is teaching our little owl pin cushion. And now that we've cut out all of our pieces and put it together, we're going to work on the applique. So we're going to make sure that our top fabrics are attached all the way through to our bottom fabrics. So we can do that with a couple of different stitches on the machine, depending on what stitches you have. We are again on the Baby Lock Crescendo, so we have a lot of options here. We're going to go into our menu, and we're going to do kind of a hand look. It's also referred to as a blanket stitch. So we'll go and grab that from our decorative stitches. And that is our blanket stitch. So it kind of looks like a ladder. So this is probably the most popular applique stitch to use for the majority of machines that have that stitch. You can also use just straight lines, or you can use a regular zigzag. But today we're going to go ahead and use that blanket stitch because it goes really well with our project. And then secondly, we're going to go ahead and move our guide beam. So if you see that red line on the screen represents the red line on our fabric. And we're going to use that to help keep us straight and keep us guided. So we're going to move it to the flat edge of our applique. So we're going to use our little control button here and scoot that guide beam so now it's laying right on that flat line, and that'll kind of help know where our edge of our fabric should always be lined up with. It'll be lined up with that guide beam. All right, so let's go ahead and start with one of the easier bits, and that'll be the straightest side you can find. So we'll start with the edge of our heart. We're going to put our foot down and our line up against the edge of our heart, because that's where we want that straight line to be. We'll make sure that our speed is adjusted to kind of a medium, actually just below medium speed, because we're going to be stopping and starting a lot with applique. And now we'll get started. Okay, speed them up just a little bit. All right, so we are writing the edge of that heart with our applique stitches. What we're going to do is when we get to that very, very end, right about there, We're at the very point of our heart. So before we move on, we're going to come to our screen and we're going to hit our restart button. On this screen, it's this little picture of the needle and the hearts. So we'll touch that, and that restarts our stitch as if we're starting from the beginning. So on your machine, it might be a different button, or you might not have the button at all, and you'll need to pick a stitch and then switch back to the stitch that you're working on. But one way or the other, when you hit a corner on applique, you want to restart the applique stitch, so you don't have to guess which way that needle is going to swing. So as you can see, you have different needle positions going on here, and it's really hard to predict that if you don't have the stitch restart. So now we've restarted our stitch. We're going to turn our heart around so we can go down the other side. And now that we're starting at the beginning, we don't have to worry about where it's going to start. Curves are probably the hardest part with applique, and the trick is just taking it really, really slow and pivoting a lot. You're just following the curve of your heart. When you hit a sharp corner like that, we're going to again put our foot down, restart as if we're from the beginning, and go back. We'll pivot around that corner and keep going. And we've hit ourselves another corner, so we're going to restart again. Pivot. And go down that edge. So you can see the hardest part of applique is really just being a little patient. You're going to take it one step at a time, and you're going to be doing a lot of restarting. So it's good to have your machine down to know what the best way is to restart. Let's see. I'll go one more stitch down. Don't be afraid to take it slow when you're doing applique. But when it comes to applique, hard work pays off. So let's go ahead and tie off. Now on this machine you have a little dot. This is a stitch in place. So it's really nice if your machine has that instead of doing a back tack to do a stitch in place. And there is our applique heart. So you can see all the places that we've turned around and restarted. So really the key to good applique is just taking it slow and restarting a lot. So now I'm going to go ahead and finish some of the other pieces of our little owl, and then we'll be putting them together. Right, so if we get a close-up on our owl here, we've got him all stitched up, and notice I've only stitched around the edges of the things on the inside of the owl, because we're about to work on the outside of the owl right now when we put our backing piece on it. And just a quick note for the eyes, the pattern did suggest little black buttons, which I definitely suggest. I didn't have any in the shop today, so I just free motioned little pupils in there, but that's also a good option, is to just hand sew some little black buttons. And now we're going to put our owl together. So this time we're going to go ahead and go wrong sides together. Because of it being raw edge applique and us using this decorative blanket stitch, it's going to kind of cover up all of these little squirrely guys, and it's kind of part of the fun of it, is it's kind of homespun looking. And now we're going to take this back to the machine and we're going to finish putting our owl together. So again, we'll get our guide beam on. And let me just make sure we're on the right stitch here. All right, so we're going to be going, let's start right about here is good. We're going to be going on the edge. Oh, and give me one moment. Looks like we have the wrong color thread. Let's change that thread and then get going. All right, so we've got the right thread color in there, so let's get going. Again, we want to go as slow as we need to. This is a little faster because we're on a straight edge. We've got that guide beam keeping us straight, so he's super handy. Whoop. And let's check our thread. This is a good opportunity to see how this machine threads, now that I think about it, because he's actually pretty cool. We're going to check our bobbin. It's a little low, but we should make it. All right, so let's check out the threading on this machine. It'll just take a second. I'm not going to go too much over this part because it's kind of like a regular sewing machine, the up and down. The real fun part is to take a look and see how the threader works. So we're going to go up and through this part. It catches and we cut the thread. And now all we do is we push our button. Woo! And he's threaded. Cool, so let's try that again. And we're back at it. Notice I started just a little bit before where the thread broke so that my new stitches would tack down the old stitches. No worries. When little things happen like that, we can always work around them. I have a feeling that was because I was a little too close to the edge of my fabric, so it got tangled underneath in the hole there of the needle plate. All right, so we want to really slow down on this curve. And we'll go ahead and stop there. We'll pivot around. We're going to hit our restart button or change our stitch to a different one and then back, however your machine is working. And we'll go ahead and turn this corner. And just keep that fabric lined up. And we'll stop right about here. Twist them, not too far. Restart. And sew again. Let's get them cut. There we go. This guy's gonna be real cute. I like to see that nice straight red line so we know we're staying straight. Okay, sounds like we're almost out of bobbin thread. Almost there. Coming up to the trickier part, that's the little ears. So we're going to do another stop start at this corner. And we're going to kind of do a half pivot. Restart. And restart. Pivot. Make sure that ear gets out of there. So this will be the hardest part. Starting to bunch our fabric because it's so skinny. You can always keep your needle down and just make sure that that little owl ear is not getting stuck in your needle plate. Looks like he's still clogged here. We're going to go ahead and cut our thread. Yeah, he's a little stuck. This will happen a lot on applique because we're working on the edge of the fabric. So we got our ear a little munched. We're just going to pull out some of our stitching. Okay, and he's even a little offset, so we'll reset those little stitches. Okay. Bring those pieces back together so we have that nice pretty ear again. And why don't we go ahead and stop there on that side, and we'll go ahead and move on to our other ear, because where we're going to stuff is going to be on this top edge anyway. So we'll leave him open for just a bit. Alright, so we're going to skip over this part and go to our outside ear and stitch him down. Let's see how far we can get with this ear. Start real slow because we want to get munched in that hole. Alright. Again, we're going to use a stitch in place button if we have it. So we're not going back and forth, just making a nice little knot. Cut the thread. Okay, so now we've gone around all the outer edges of our little owl. So now it's time to stuff him and put him back together. Alright, so we got our stuffing here. You can use whatever stuffing you'd like. So this is a great opportunity to use old fabrics, old scraps, but really popular is you can buy the pre-made pincushion stuffing, which is kind of like a sort of a wood chip sort of a feel, or even like a sand grain. They come in that too. That also sharpens your pins as you use it, so I highly recommend doing that. I just happen to have some of this fluff hanging around so we can make use of him. And I would say you want this packed really nice and firm, especially if you're only using fluff, because you're going to have your needles in here. You don't want them coming through the other side too quickly. The nice part about raw edge applique is you don't have to worry about turning really, really teeny tiny things out, like our little tiny owl, or if you come into the class and get a chance to make his little buddy, the little tiny mouse, he's even smaller and really hard to turn out. So because we're sewing on the outside of the raw fabric, it makes our lives a little easier. All right. A little bit more stuffing in there. And once you have a good amount of stuffing, I do, if you haven't already, recommend pinning or clipping the most that you can in just maybe one or two areas up top, as this is going to be the most difficult part, is keeping these teeny tiny areas. And if you feel a little more comfortable, you can start from the other direction and only have to fill from the bottom where it's straight. Whatever works for you, but for right now we're going to take a quick break so I can pin these edges together, and then we will be finishing up our owl. Right? And once you've closed up that seam, you have a finished owl pin cushion. So all you really would want to do at this point, if you'd like, is to go around those edges and start clipping some of those stray seams out and threads out. But with raw edge, the nice part is, and especially using that blanket stitch, it's kind of part of the design. So because that blanket stitch is a nice solid edge, you get kind of a fun, cute design. Alrighty, and that is our little owl. So that was our second class as part of our IG Quilt Fest 2020 highlight, one of my second favorite classes to teach. And we will be having another class come up that's talking about the serger apron, where we actually get to use the serger and a cover hem machine and use a couple different stitches. So keep an eye out for that one. But that is our little buddy pincushion, our little owl.